This week has been weird in that we've had a lot of injuries that didn't occur last weekend actually pop up during practices. I'm going to try my best to give you the updated flex rankings. Tier 1, Tier 2, obviously you can argue with yourself about these. I don't care. If they're healthy, you put them in your lineup. We have Saquon Barkley, CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Derrick Henry, A.J. Brown, Drake London, Gibbs, Kamara, Bijan, Diggs, Brees, DJ Moore, and Josh Jacobs. The only thing possibly worth pointing out here is Bijan Robinson. It did pop up on the injury report on Thursday. He will be important to monitor on Friday. Now, I understand people are going to be pissed with him this high in these rankings. I know y'all. But I will say, if you're a Bijan Robinson hater, go over to Underdog and take him to have fewer than 96.5 total yards. Don't scream at me in my comment section. Now, going over to our next tier, we are going to be led off with Jayden Reed. Now, with Reed, the main thing to be on the lookout for will be the involvement of Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson into this offense this week. The base expectation is Romeo Doubs will be playing, and there is the outside chance that Christian Watson is in as well. Now, you can tell based off these rankings, I don't think it matters too much, and I'm still going to be ranking Jayden Reed as if he is a must-start receiver where you have an implied team total this week of about 27 points for this Green Bay Packers offense going up against the Arizona Cardinals. These sportsbooks are currently putting out the Packers to be the third highest scoring offense in the NFL this week. Now, our next receiver will be at the very top of the NFL in targets with Garrett Wilson. Now, obviously, I think Wilson is a must-start player, but I'm a little bit concerned. One, if you're looking at sportsbook projections, they do project out to be one of the worst offenses in the NFL. Plus, with the change with this coaching staff, there's an outside chance that we have fewer, I don't want to say manufactured touches for Garrett Wilson, but if you watch the Jets game, it doesn't feel like those 23 targets he had against the Vikings were organic. It seemed like they were doing everything they could just to force the ball in his direction. So with the changing coaching staff, maybe the target volume does come down just a tiny bit. You still clearly start him. Deontay Johnson, you're clearly going to start as well. Clearly the Carolina Panthers imploded last week, but if you're looking at the projection for this offense against the Atlanta Falcons, they're currently projected to score about 20.5 points, which is higher than what you're going to have with a team like the Jets. And at the same time, you are looking at a receiver that's had 33 targets over the past 3 weeks. So Deontay Johnson has to be in your lineup. James Conner has to be in your lineup as well. I'll be starting him as my RB1 in the Flock League. I know it's ugly, but still, anyway, I mean, if you're looking at James Conner so far this year, you are averaging almost 20 opportunities a game. Obviously, the week against the Detroit Lions, where you just simply can't run the ball, definitely does skew this. But if you remove that Lions week, you had 19 points for James Conner week 1, 19 points week 2, 18 points week 4, 14 points week 5. He has been a very consistent option. The only hesitation I have is he's not getting involved as a receiver that much. Chris Godwin will be our next name. Godwin, every single week so far this year, you have seen at least double-digit fantasy points. Now, with that being said, he has declined every single week over the past 4, and I'll say, hey, back in week 2, we had him as that sell-high candidate after a monstrous game against Detroit. But besides that, I still think that Godwin's going to have the consistent target share. The only thing is, obviously, the touchdowns were a little unsustainable at the beginning of the season. But yeah, going into the future against the New Orleans Saints, we've historically seen that Mike Evans in this matchup actually scales back a bit, where Chris Godwin takes the lead as the wide receiver 1. At least historically, that's what's happened. And the Devonta Smith is a receiver that I'm starting with absolutely no hesitation whatsoever. I mean, with Smith, you have at least 14 points and almost 15 points in every single game played. Now, obviously, in week 3, where he gets you 14.9, he only played 76% of the snaps before going down with the concussion. But he actually had 100% of the snaps in week 1, 100% of the snaps in week 2. That's the base expectation you have with Devonta Smith going into week 6. And he should be 100% healthy. He practiced in full on Thursday. Now, our next tier is going to be Marvin Harrison Jr. Now, I understand a lot of people in the wide receiver rankings video were upset with Harrison being this low. And I want to be on record saying that I actually do have Marvin Harrison much higher than this in our rest of season rankings. I think really all rookie wide receivers, the expectation is they continue to improve as the season goes on. But I'm a little concerned if you're looking at the role where over the past 2 weeks, you've only had 13 total targets for Marvin Harrison. This past week, you only had 76% of the snaps. Now, what is worth pointing out as well is if you look at his underdog pick'em at the moment, last I checked, they had Marvin Harrison higher, lower 53.5 receiving yards. If you really loved Harrison and you think he is a top 10 wide receiver, even in this matchup against the Packers, you can go through and take the higher than 53.5 receiving yards on Underdog Fantasy. And of course, you can find that link in the description and the comment section. And if you use promo code FLOCK over there on Underdog, you will get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, you'll get a free Joe Burrow pick for the Sunday games, more than less than half a total yard, and a free team review in the live streams that we are doing every single day. Now, going over to the next guy, we'll be looking at James Cook. With James Cook, he has not practiced this week. So there is the outside chance that James Cook is not somebody that you can rely upon. Typically, Cook would be higher in these rankings for us, but with his unavailability at practice, I think even if he does play, you probably lower your expectations down a bit. In reality, Cook is going to be having to move in these rankings one way or another. He's either going to move up or he's going to move down, but it's really going to depend on the practice report that we get on Friday. Now, Joe Mixon will be our next player. With Mixon, did not practice on Wednesday, but did practice on Thursday. I think it's a very clear spot against the New England Patriots that if Joe Mixon were to play, you probably have Joe Mixon in your lineup. Now, obviously, the Friday practice report is going to be massive here. Going up against the New England Patriots, we should expect that you should have the Houston Texans running the ball a ton in the second half. They are favored by about a touchdown in this game, but Dameon Pierce will be good to go as well. So if Joe Mixon isn't 100% healthy, you could possibly expect Pierce to have some work. Chuba Hubbard will be our next back. Obviously, Chuba has been phenomenal over the past 3 weeks. He is averaging over 20 points per game. This is a Carolina Panthers offense that looks like they are set up to actually have that bounce back spot against the Atlanta Falcons. So clearly, Chuba Hubbard is a must start running back this week. And looking at David Montgomery is also a must start running back this week, where every single week this year, he has had a rushing touchdown. It's been phenomenal. Now, yes, Jahmyr Gibbs has had a ton of usage at the goal line himself. And while, yes, David Montgomery has averaged about 45% of the snaps here in this Detroit Lions offense, frankly, it hasn't mattered. He has actually had some receiving usage here as well. It's very similar to what you have with somebody like James Conner. It's a matchup that you should be able to run all over. It's a running back that's been crushing this season. It's an elite offensive line. Clearly, Montgomery's a must-start running back and someone to be really excited about. Then Tony Pollard will be our next guy at 26. If you're looking at Pollard, we had the disappointing week 3 weeks back against the Green Bay Packers. But outside of that, 16 carries, 17 carries, as well as 22 carries against the Miami Dolphins. Obviously, unique game environment, but you've also had a ton of usage as a receiver. Now, typically, Tony Pollard's going to be a little bit lower in these rankings for me, but what's actually surprising is if you're looking at sportsbooks currently, they are projecting out the Tennessee Titans with an implied team total of 21 points. So sportsbooks are saying that the Titans offense should be respectable against the Indianapolis Colts here. And if Pollard's going to have this kind of workload in an offense that can pick up first downs, clearly a must-start option. And then Mike Evans will be our next guy. Evans, absolutely crusher over the past 2 weeks. We had 3 touchdowns over the past 2 weeks. You've had 21 targets as well. Just as we've historically seen, this is a tougher matchup going up against the New Orleans Saints for Evans. So I think you scale him back just somewhat. I know that some people say they won't start him against Lattimore. I'll still start him, but I'm not expecting wide receiver 1 production. I'm just going through and jam him in at the flex or wide receiver 2. Now, dropping down to our next tier, we're going to have Terry McLaurin. With Terry McLaurin, obviously, I want to be on record and say that I understand that Jaden Daniels is the best quarterback that he's ever played with. That Jaden Daniels is one of the best quarterbacks in the league right this second, at least with what we have seen from quarterback play through the first 5 weeks. Now, with that being said, even though Daniels is phenomenal, particularly in real life for the Washington Commanders and in fantasy because of his rushing production, if we're looking at the passing volume, which is actually what matters most here, if you're projecting Terry McLaurin with his interactions with this quarterback, Jaden Daniels is averaging fewer passing yards per game than the Washington Commanders did last year. Daniels is one of these rushing quarterbacks where we should expect that a lot of the value is going to be monopolized by Jaden Daniels himself. So I don't think that Terry McLaurin is some like locked and loaded top 12 wide receiver. While over the past 3 weeks, he has been great. If you do take a step backwards, you can see he's averaging about 14 points per game so far this year, 13 points per game. So he's definitely a solid wide receiver too. I just don't know if he's much more than that. Matchup against Baltimore, they should have to throw the ball over and over and over again though. And then Brian Thomas Jr. will be our next guy. Thomas has been phenomenal. Back-to-back weeks here with over 20 fantasy points. He's had 3 touchdowns so far this season with, I believe, let's do some quick little math here, 34 total targets. So touchdown rate, maybe a little bit high. Maybe it comes back down to earth just a bit. But obviously, Thomas is a top-end talent. And this is a weird matchup going up against the Chicago Bears in London. So Thomas may be higher than this in these rankings going into the future, but specifically against the Bears in London, I probably want to be a little hesitant. T. Higgins has actually averaged 10 targets per game over the past 3 weeks. Going up against the New York Giants, however, with the assumption that we have no Malik Neighbors, it may be a spot where the Cincinnati Bengals are able to run the ball consistently in the second half. Very similar to what you had with the matchup against the Carolina Panthers 2 weeks ago. So obviously, Higgins coming off a monstrous performance with almost 30 fantasy points. This may get scaled backwards just a bit. DeAndre Swift will be our next back. I'm actually starting DeAndre Swift in the Flock League. Really hope he comes through for us. He did last week with the 20 fantasy points 2 weeks ago. He was on my bench. He was on your bench. He was on everybody's benches. But yeah, back-to-back weeks with 20 fantasy points. The usage has been consistent all year. I mean, where even in the first 3 weeks where he was a bomb, I mean, week 1, 11 opportunities. Week 2, 19 opportunities. Week 3, 17 opportunities. Week 4, 23 opportunities. Week 5, 23 opportunities. So the volume's been there. What you really need to see for Swift is you need to see the offense be able to pick up first downs, have trips to the red zone. And right now, sportsbooks are giving the Chicago Bears an implied team total of 23.5 points, where you probably can start them with confidence going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, Brian Robinson will be somebody that we're having to monitor for practice on Friday. This is a running back that's had double-digit points every single game this year. He's been great. Now, I will say this is a tougher matchup going up against the Baltimore Ravens, where most weeks we should expect that the Commanders are winning the game. They can run the ball in the second half. Here, they're about touchdown dogs to Baltimore. So there is that outside chance that the game flow gets away and maybe it's a little more of an Austin Eckler performance. Obviously, he hasn't been in practice all week. He only played 34% of the snaps against Cleveland. So it's mainly just an injury thing on why he's going to be a little bit lower in the short term. Obviously, still a crusher in the long term. Wan'Dale Robinson will be here. It's hard not to have Wan'Dale where, I mean, you're averaging so far about the same amount of points per game as Terry McLaurin. And at the same time, this is a phenomenal matchup going up against the Cincinnati Bengals, where the Bengals are actually allowing the Giants to have an implied team total of 22 points. That's how bad this Bengals defense is. And we are making these rankings, obviously, under the assumption that Malik Neighbors is not playing. Malik Neighbors did not practice on Thursday. From everything that I can read, it sounds like Malik Neighbors would be trending to miss Sunday night. Obviously, I'll be updating the rankings on flockfantasy.com literally every single day. So if we get positive news regarding Malik Neighbors, then at that point, we'll move Wan'Dale down and we will move Neighbors up. George Pickens will be our next option. With Pickens, he's that squeaky wheel in Pittsburgh right now. I mean, typically the squeaky wheel is going to get a little bit of grease. It should have some targets going to him. My issue is, yeah, you only played 59% of the snaps this past week against the Dallas Cowboys. This is what we call the Arthur Smith effect. And you're going up against the Raiders, where at the end of the day, it should be one of the lowest scoring games in the NFL this week. So I'm not super excited. Zay Flowers will be our next guy. Zay Flowers going up against Washington. The Baltimore Ravens are supposed to be the highest scoring offense in the league. Obviously, we are a little more excited to start Zay Flowers last week against the Cincinnati Bengals, where the spread on this game was very close and we were expecting a close game overall. Now, the difference is if you are looking at this week in particular, you're going up against Washington, which in theory, you should be excited for, but the Ravens are touchdown favorites. So there's that outside chance. It's a little bit more of a Derrick Henry game and a little bit less of a 30-40 pass game from Lamar. Going over to our next guy, we will have Najee Harris. Now, I want to be on record. While Najee Harris is not a good running back, he is not a talented running back. There are many, many running backs behind him in these rankings that would be better than him in this situation. Najee Harris is in a great situation. He is somebody that you start in a great matchup against the Raiders with no Jaylen Warren. Now, Jaylen Warren was at practice on Wednesday. He was at practice on Thursday. We were told at the beginning of the week that Jaylen Warren would not be playing. So if Jaylen Warren is good to go, then obviously Najee Harris falls down these ranks. But if we're looking at what you've had through the past, really all season, 22 opportunities week 1, 19 opportunities week 2, 23 opportunities week 3, 19 opportunities week 4, 16 opportunities week 5. And this is an offense that can probably lead in the second half and look to run the ball over the Raiders. Now, our next guy will be Zach Moss. With Zach Moss gets injured against the Baltimore Ravens, dud performance, but he was pretty much having everything here in Cincinnati, especially as a receiver as well over Chase Brown before his injury. I still believe that Zach Moss is the starting running back when healthy. This matchup against the New York Giants, we could assume that the Bengals are going to be running the ball consistently. Now, the issue, of course, is we don't know the availability. We don't know the extent of this injury. We will have to get more information on Friday and then update the rankings. If Moss were to miss, then obviously Chase Brown is somebody that you have to fly way up these ranks. Now, our next guy will be Rico Dowdle. Rico Dowdle this past week saw a season high 50% of snaps, a season high 20 carries, a season high 87 rushing yards, a season high 4.35 yards per carry. And at the same time, you had the receiving touchdown as well. So Rico Dowdle, you get the full-blown breakout last week. Now, with that being said, it is a very tough matchup going up against the Detroit Lions. What we have seen so far this year is the Detroit Lions are okay to let you throw the ball, but they are going to make sure that you cannot run it on them. Now, Zeke has been completely phased out. It's pretty much all Dowdle here. It should be a decent offense in a super high-scoring game. So I think Dowdle is definitely somebody that you can start. I don't want to sit here and act like you just have to jam him in. Now, Amari Cooper will be our next guy. I mean, Amari has all the opportunity in the world. Amari's averaging about 10 targets per game so far this year. But with that 10 target per game mark, Amari Cooper is also averaging about 10 points per game. Super inefficient. This is what you'd expect with Deshaun Watson under center. At least this is now what we expect. Didn't know what to expect coming into the year. At least I didn't. 17.5 point implied team total for this Cleveland Browns offense. So right now, sportsbooks are telling us that the Browns should have one of the worst offenses in the league. Should be a team that has to throw the ball a ton. But what you need here for Amari Cooper, and I know I'm not the only person, everybody and their mom knows this. You need Jameis Winston to come in so we can have some passing volume in this offense. But there's plenty of passing volume to go around in Atlanta. Darnell Mooney is a receiver that has played at least 90% of the snaps every single week for the Atlanta Falcons. He is an every down player where over the past 4 weeks now, I mean, the man is sitting with, 21 plus 37 total targets? He's averaging almost 10 targets a game. Obviously, this past week, you had the massive blow up with, I want to say a career high 16 targets. At least a season high 9 receptions, a season high 105 receiving yards, a season high multiple receiving touchdowns, a season high 31 fantasy points. Now going up against the Carolina Panthers, it should be a game where the Atlanta Falcons are able to put points up on the board easily. They have an applied team total of almost 27 points here. Now Tank Dell will be our next option. With Tank Dell, obviously he's been horrible all year. I mean, you're averaging 6-7 fantasy points a game. It's disgusting, but the saving grace that you have with Tank Dell is no Nico Collins opens up a ton of targets in this offense. No Nico Collins, Tank Dell is going to turn into not an every down player, but a player that can see 7, 8, 9 targets from one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the NFL with CJ Stroud. Going up against the New England Patriots, however, a hesitation that I have here is this should be a game environment that is lower scoring overall in comparison to most Houston performances. Now, J.K. Dobbins will be our next player. If you look at Dobbins, obviously against Pitt, against KC, he disappointed, but it was really tough matchups. And what you actually saw is you actually saw him increase his snaps to 65% and then 71% against the Kansas City Chiefs. Hopefully the bye week gave the Los Angeles Chargers the opportunity to get Justin Herbert fully healthy, as well as the offensive line fully healthy. To go to Denver here, the Chargers are favored in this game. But if you are looking at sportsbooks, this should be the lowest scoring game of the week. So I don't think you're super excited about anybody, but if you were excited about someone, it would be Dobbins. And then Travis Etienne will be our next back. Obviously with Etienne, we have to monitor the practice reports. We have to make sure that he is good to go to play. While he was absolutely garbage this past week against the Indianapolis Colts, where Tank Bigsby ate his lunch, Etienne's still the running back with all the usage as a receiver. I mean, you go through and look at this. He's had 22 targets so far through the first 5 weeks. This past week, even with only 38% of the snaps, he still had 7 targets. So I think he's probably the best running back here. He's definitely the running back with the receiving role. If he is fully healthy, maybe he takes a few more of those carries away from Tank Bigsby as well. But regardless, it's a London game where typically we're trying to avoid those players. And you're going up against the Chicago Bears as well. So it's a pretty damn tough matchup. Now going over to our next tier, we're going to be looking at Jerome Ford. With Jerome Ford, it's a matchup against the Eagles. You would assume that they have no other option but to have him out there a ton. Deonta Foreman is not going to be somebody that can be effectively used as a receiver. Obviously, Ford has the receiving volume here for Cleveland, but should be one of the worst offenses in the league. This past week, even in a game you get blown out against Washington, Ford only plays 58% of the snaps. Devin Singletary will be our next option. Singletary has been in practice. Obviously, this will be a player that we have to continue to monitor to see if he will be good to go. The usage as a receiver hasn't been great. I mean, this isn't a great offense in general. At least I wouldn't say it's not. But sportsbooks are giving them credit with a 22-point implied team total because the Cincinnati Bengals defense is garbage. Now, Chase Brown will be in here at 46. Chase Brown, this ranking's kind of a floor for him. Where obviously over the past 2 weeks, he's blown up. He's had 3 touchdowns over the past 2 weeks. He's sitting here with a total of, an average of 16, 17 opportunities over the past 2 weeks as well. Going up against the New York Giants, you'd assume it's a spot where the Cincinnati Bengals are easily able to put points up on the board. That's what sportsbooks are saying, and they should be able to run the ball as well in the second half. The main thing hinges on the availability and the injury of Zach Moss. If it looks like Zach Moss may be limited, then at that point, I think you can go ahead. You can move Chase Brown higher. Now, Ramondre Stevenson will be our next back here. I'm not excited about Ramondre at all. So honestly, I probably move Ramondre down these rankings. I'll probably bench him in my own league. He honestly probably moves down a couple tiers here. Trey Sermon will be our next guy. Sermon was at practice on Thursday. He practiced in full. So did Anthony Richardson. He got there with the rushing touchdown last week, and he got there with the 6 receptions as well. He crushed with 18 fantasy points. My thing is, if A-Rich is the starting quarterback here, I would expect that you have a lower checkdown rate overall, as well as you potentially have the risk of Anthony Richardson vulturing rushing touchdowns. So A-Rich here at QB obviously negatively impacts Sermon, at least in my mind. Christian Kirk will be our next guy. I was actually surprised to see, I think the underdog pick him on Christian Kirk this week's only like 43.5 receiving yards. Obviously, over the past 3 weeks, he's been great. This past week, he had a season high 88 receiving yards, but ultimately, it's not a great offense. It's not a great matchup. I think Brian Thomas is the alpha wide receiver one at this point in this offense. Jameson Williams will be our next guy. Jameson, very clear boom bust option. Had him as that sell high option after week 2. You know you're going to get the massive spikes. You know you're going to get the massive duds. And yeah, over the past 2 weeks that he's played, you had 3 targets. You had 2 targets. One of those games, he gets you the 80-yard receiving touchdown. So yeah, when that comes through for you, you're very excited, but good luck predicting it. Here it's a good matchup going up against Dallas, however, where Dallas obviously has a ton of injuries with their defense. And right now, the Lions project out to be, I believe, the second or third highest scoring offense in the league this week. Josh Downs will be our next man. Now, Josh Downs, it's very difficult to rank him right now. Downs has not practiced on Wednesday. Downs has not practiced on Thursday. Now, obviously, we are not going to have Michael Pittman Jr. here, and Downs has had 20 targets over the past 2 weeks. He's been great. Now, with Anthony Richardson coming in, the passing volume is going to be coming down for Josh Downs. And at the same time, if he's not fully healthy, I don't know if we can assume that he is just a lock to see 25, 30% of this team's targets. So I probably don't love starting Downs this week unless he comes out and we get some really positive news about him on Friday. Then obviously we'll move him up the rankings on flogfantasy.com accordingly. Rashad White will be our next guy. Rashad White did not practice today either. So this is going to be another player that you have to monitor. Rashad White has had the receiving usage in Tampa all year. So this is going to be more so a ranking for a full PPR formats where, so far this year, the man is sitting with 17 receptions through the first 3 weeks. 5 weeks. So you're averaging about 3.5 receptions per game. Obviously, has not scored a touchdown. So the fantasy points have not been there. And he's super inefficient. So I don't want to act like you should ever be excited about Rashad White, but it's a decent offense. It's a game where the Bucs can possibly win. I know it's in New Orleans, but at the same time, obviously, have no Derek Carr. So you'd assume that they can run the ball in the second half. Now, dropping down to our next tier, we're going to go Dontavian Wicks. With this ranking of Dontavian Wicks, we are assuming both Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson will play. If one of them misses, then Dontavian Wicks moves up these rankings. If both of them miss, then Dontavian Wicks flies up these rankings. Now, Chris Olave, this is going to be a statement ranking here. 1, you crush my underdog pick him at the beginning of the week. And 2, if Olave wasn't consistently featured in a Derek Carr offense, I don't know if you can be super excited about it in a Spencer Rattler offense. So far this year, you are only sitting with a total of 28 targets through the first 5 weeks. So Olave's averaging fewer than 6 targets a game, and Spencer Rattler is his QB. A lot of it will be much higher than this most weeks into the future. But I kind of want to avoid all Saints not named Alvin Kamara this week. Calvin Ridley was a bum in week 3. Calvin Ridley was a bum in week 4. I'm giving Calvin Ridley the benefit of the doubt coming out of the bye week where this coaching staff is saying that they're going to try to get Ridley more involved. They gave the man $72 million. Well, so Brandon Ayuk got $120 million. We see that means nothing. But anyway, if you are looking at Ridley here, you have a 21-point implied team total going up against the Indianapolis Colts. So I want to give the benefit of the doubt that this should be a decent Tennessee Titans offense. Jalen Tolbert will be our next guy. Jalen Tolbert obviously looks to be in a great spot. He's coming off a career high in targets, receptions, receiving yards, and he had the receiving touchdown, the game-winning receiving touchdown for the Dallas Cowboys. It was a wild, wild roller coaster if you watch the Flock League video. 21 fantasy points, looks great against the Detroit Lions. You presumably see a lot of passing attempts here in Dallas. You have no Brandon Cooks. Jalen Tolbert looks like the second option for Dak Prescott, so I definitely think you can start Jalen Tolbert this week. Javonte Williams will be your next guy in at 57. Javonte crushed last week. You see the 13 carries, you see the 6 targets, so 19 total opportunities. You have 10 fantasy points just based off the receiving usage alone. This matchup going up against the Chargers isn't great. Chargers have a good defense, and right now the Denver Broncos project out to be the second worst offense in the NFL. Probably don't want to start anybody in Denver. The Las Vegas Raiders are right there with the Denver Broncos with one of the worst offenses in the NFL right now. Definitely want to monitor the availability of Zamir White. If Zamir White misses, I think Madison's about here. If Zamir White plays, I think Madison falls even a little bit lower. Austin Eckler, we're going to have to monitor the availability of Brian Robinson. Brian Robinson missed practice on Thursday. I'm assuming that he's playing on Sunday. But obviously, if Brian Robinson were to miss, Eckler would move up these rankings. It wouldn't turn Eckler into an absolute must-start option every single week because we have seen that they're willing to use Jeremy McNichols as well. So it's probably going to be a committee regardless. And Bucky Irving will be a running back that we slide in at 60. While Bucky has really not much usage as a receiver, and the opportunities have remained low, he's been more efficient pretty much every single week than Rachaad White. Well, at the same time, Rachaad White did miss practice on Thursday. Now, if White does miss practice on Friday, and it looks like White is trending towards missing this game, Bucky Irving would probably slide up in the same tier as Terry McLaurin. I don't know exactly where we would rank him inside that tier, but that's the tier that he would be in. Now, Ladd McConkey will be our next guy. With Ladd, I have him in the Flock League. I may end up starting him. The issue is it's a very tough matchup going up against Denver, but with where Ladd and how Ladd operates in this offense, I don't think you're going to get shadowed by Surtain by any means. DeAndre Hopkins will be our next guy here. With Hopkins, I think your hope is that you end up getting a trade out of Tennessee. Against Miami, you only played 32%. Honestly, Hopkins needs to be lower in these rankings. I'll move Hopkins lower on the site for the final ranks. Jacoby Myers, our next guy. Jacoby Myers, we're going to have to continue to monitor the practice report. Tough matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Garbage offense. But if Myers is good to go, obviously you could start him if we have no Devontae Adams. Keon Coleman will probably have no Khalil Shakir. So I want to say, Keon Coleman has a lot of upside. Let's get Keon Coleman in. And while we've kind of gotten lucky with touchdowns so far this year, with a total of only 16 targets, he's had 2 TDs. It's probably unsustainable. What you need to see from Keon is we need to see the actual target share move higher in this offense. Where, right now, like we said, you've had 16 total targets through the first 5 weeks. So even without Shakir, it's hard to trust him. I know Shaheed obviously has been a crusher this year. I'm embarrassed that we said to bench Shaheed in a tough matchup against the Chiefs last week. And I'll probably be embarrassed when I say to bench Shaheed again in an environment where you have no Derek Carr. And I'll probably be forced to make a video on Sunday night apologizing as I always am. Rome Odunze will be our next guy in. Rome, I've actually seen with some of the team reviews that we've been doing through flockfantasy.com that Rome's sitting out there on a few of your waiver wires, which is just mind-boggling for me. While Rome maybe is not somebody that you're excited about in the short term, for the love of God, have him on your roster if he's free. The long-term upside's nuts. Xavier Legette got into full practice on Thursday. Seems like he will be good to go. And a game that sportsbooks are saying the Panthers offense will bounce back with. Keenan Allen, you get 6 targets last week. It should be a good Bears offense, but still, he's been horrible. Roshan, please keep scoring touchdowns for my underdog teams. But at the same time, you have 10 opportunities this week, 7 opportunities the week prior. So I think Swift is the guy. And then Tank Bigsby, this is kind of a statement ranking. Obviously, if Travis Etienne were to miss, Bigsby flies up. But I mean, with Bigsby, you've had one target all year. So in a full PPR format, I don't know if we can be super excited about you. Probably want to go ahead and bench you unless we have no Travis Etienne, because it's a 3-man running back by committee with Etienne in here. But I think that's all I got for you. I really hope I was able to help you out. And of course, hit the like, subscribe to Play Fantasy Football. And if you wanted to go take any of those pick'ems that we talked about in the video, I think probably the one that would stand out to most of y'all would be higher than 53.5 receiving yards on Marvin Harrison. You can find that link to Underdog Fantasy in the description and comment section. Code FLOCK will give you a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, code FLOCK will hook you up with a free Joe Burrow pick, more than less than half a total yard for the game on Sunday. And you'll be getting a free team review in the live stream that we are doing every single night. Just make sure you set up an account on flockfantasy.com with the same email address as your Underdog Fantasy account. That way I'm able to hook you up with that free team review voucher. But thank you, appreciate you, and hope I get to see you out in the stream tonight.